Hello, and welcome to Mental Health Matters podcast. I'm your host, Liz Lang, and I'm here with Dr. Mark Burton. In this podcast, we will talk about all things mental health. Thank you so much for joining us. Hey guys, Liz Lang here with Dr. Mark Burton, and this week we're going to get into family secrets. So this is a very important topic because secrets are harmful. So I'm going to start by letting Mark explain why secrets are harmful and why they aren't a good idea.
Well, I think as I was thinking about why they aren't such a good idea, the first thing that comes to mind is trust. Because it's true in my experience with families, the secrets almost always come out at some point, and it may be years later. And I've certainly run into, people who found out it's, for instance, secret that their father was having an affair for a long time. The father, or, one of the parents was having an affair. And they feel really deceived, that they feel betrayed when they find something out that other people knew. And so I think what does it destroys trust, because if you were able to keep the secret, then it probably wouldn't destroy trust, but there are other problems that I'll go into with keeping secrets. But it just doesn't happen usually. The secret almost always comes out. I think the other thing that happens with secret, how I run into this, is when I'm working with couples where there's been an affair. And the person having the affair is always keeping the secret until it comes out, right? And so going back to what I just said, trust is the thing that gets damaged the most when the secret comes out. But also, I think we think that we can hide this thing and build a wall around it internally. And the problem is it doesn't work that way. I think the wall gets really big. And I read this thing, Carl Jung, who was a psychotherapist and a contemporary of Freud. Here's what he said about secrets. The possession of secrets acts like a psychic poison that alienates their possessor from the community. And I really believe that. And I think what happens is you end up building a wall around yourself. And I don't know what that is. I've thought about, maybe it's you're afraid that, the secret might come out or you might say something. So you just, essentially, you close down in a certain way. And so that's how you become isolated from the community. And when talking about community, it can be partner, kids, whoever you're keeping the secret from. So I think those two things, the betrayal that comes when you find out the secret and the destruction of trust is the first thing, the first problem. And the second is it really changes our relationship with others if we're keeping the secret.
So when I learned about this in my family theory and dynamics class, it was described as creating superficial communication throughout the whole family and superficial relationships. Because if you think about it, if there's this family secret, like, dad's secretly an alcoholic and you can't talk about it, then there's so many other areas that you can't talk about. Like, the holidays come up. Oh, well, we can't talk about that because dad drinks in the holidays, or there's alcohol in the holidays, and dad's an alcoholic. And so it just creates superficial conversations. And all of a sudden, you just feel like you can't talk about anything because it's going to bring it up.
Yeah.
And so, it creates just an odd dichotomy between the whole family.
And here's another way to look at it. We'll talk about privacy in a bit. Privacy, for me, it's really about healthy boundaries. So privacy is about boundaries, but I think secrecy is about walls. And that's another way to see the difference between them.
Yeah, so that leads perfectly into the next topic, and that is establishing the difference between secrecy and privacy, because, that is important. And when I think of privacy, I think of it more in terms of this is something that we discuss within our family, but it doesn't leave our family, right? I mean, so maybe somebody in the family is dealing with a mental illness or any sort of illness, then, and it's something that you're talking about within the family and people are open and honest about it, but you can say to your family members, this is private and this isn't going to leave our home. This is a private family matter. then it's not a secret because you have a safe place where you can talk about it, but it's private in that it stays within the family, right? That's a healthy boundary. Or even another aspect of privacy to go even further is if mom and dad are having a conflict and they're not choosing to disclose that conflict in front of their kids, that's private matter between mom and dad, but it's not a secret, right? It's not like
Hmm.
you're keeping
Right.
secrets from your kids. You're establishing a healthy boundary between your children and your, I guess, relationship with your spouse.
Right. And so, it's true we're talking about privacy within the context of a family, but I think you can also have personal privacy as well that
Hmm.
refers to your personal boundaries. But, in the example you just gave, you can actually have boundaries for the family.
Yeah.
These are the things we talk about within the family. We don't talk about outside the family. So personal boundaries around your history, your thoughts, your opinions, experience, things like that. But secrecy, in contrast, is something that you're intentionally hiding from someone else,
Yeah.
either the kids, your spouse. And here's another thing that I think will help listeners to see the difference between secrecy and privacy. I think there are two components to secrets: shame and fear. And
Mm-hmm.
so the difference, like if you're keeping a secret and you think, well, this is just private, but there's all this shame and fear. Like, what if someone finds out, or I'm shameful about this thing I'm holding on to? I think that then that helps you determine what's really probably a secret. And the shame and the fear are probably contributing to that creation of the walls that we talked about
Hmm.
uh, earlier. So the thing that, we've talked about shame in other podcasts, certainly. And the best way to get rid of shame is I think, to open it up and let light in. That's the way
Yeah.
to say
Yeah.
it. And so going back to what you just said about maybe there's some sort of mental illness or something in the family, it's not shameful if you're open to talk about it in the family.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that's how, and you're not fearful. I think that, it becomes private as you want to protect, it's really someone else's issue. It's someone in your family's issue. And you don't
Hmm.
want to be going out there, telling everybody about it. So it's not that you're shameful because you can talk about it or fearful. You're just respectful
Yeah.
of someone else's family.
And that's a really important distinction. And I think the biggest or the a really important factor here is that when it's private, you still have a safe place to discuss your feelings about it, right? So, maybe mom has is really struggling with depression. She has severe depression and she struggled with it. And you're open about it within the family, but mom doesn't want the whole world knowing. She doesn't want everybody in the
Right.
neighborhood
Right.
knowing. And so you say,
And they shouldn't. They
eh,
shouldn't know.
right, they shouldn't know. And so, but you still have a safe place where you can talk about it, where you can get your feelings out. It's not this
Hmm.
thing that you have to hold inside and that you can't, have any thoughts about. And so I think that's really an important distinction. And another thing too is oftentimes when it's a secret, it limits somebody's ability to make decisions about their lives, right?
Right.
So
Right.
so for example, going back to this idea of the secret that dad's an alcoholic,
Hmm.
and maybe it's a secret that everybody knows about but just doesn't talk about.
You can't talk about it.
You
Yeah.
can't talk about it, so because maybe there's certain people in the family that don't know, and because there's that element of shame, right? So maybe
Hmm.
maybe your dad's parents don't know, so your grandparents aren't aware, and so you can't talk about it.
Right.
And you know this is affecting somebody's ability to act for, to think and act for themselves, right? I mean, how are mom and dad supposed to know, or how are dad's parents supposed to know, well, if I'm coming over for family dinner, I shouldn't bring a bottle of wine because, my son's an alcoholic. And that's
Hmm.
just kind of one minor aspect, but that is one good way to define a secret. So another issue that I want to address is things that aren't really a secret, but you have to wait to talk about them, right? So I'm thinking in terms of adoption is a really
Uh-huh.
good example. And, you know, everybody in the family is probably going to be aware of this. Now, where this could turn into a secret is as if you just pretend like the adoption never happened. You never tell the kid, you never explain that they were adopted, and you just let them go their whole lives thinking that you are their biological child. That's not a good idea, and that's not going to work because eventually there's just too many ways that this can come out. I mean, you get into blood typing in school, and then you just eventually it's going to come out. So those are instances where it's like, obviously you can't explain to your 1 year old they're adopted because they're going to have no idea what you're talking about. But it's something that the family needs to be open about and needs to be discussing from an early age so that this child can grow up feeling comfortable.
Right.
So you
And
said,
I've certainly run into families where they try and keep it a secret, and I've never understood the reason why. I mean, it has been, as I recall, it's about some shame around not being able to get pregnant.
mm,
Now, and I think some women and some couples have that shame, and so they're thinking, okay, if we adopt, we don't need to tell anybody, and then we don't have to have that shame around not being able to have our own children. Which, again, I don't understand, but there are certainly some people who do that. But I think it's a huge mistake because nowadays with the what are all the DNA things?
there's like
Something
23
20,
and
20
me or
me,
something
23 me
like
or
that.
something.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's just one of them.
Hmm.
So what happens, anybody can, send in a DNA sample and it will list anyone who they think you're closely related to. I've had clients who've had terrible shock and it's really thrown their family when they find out that, say, the father isn't the biological father. So
Yep.
no one ever talked about the affair that the mom had, or that all of a sudden they know that, the father's best friend happened to be the father of the child, the biological father of the child. And that could really throw a family into turmoil.
Yeah.
And so nowadays, with all these services where you can get your DNA checked and your ancestry checked, you can't hide that anymore.
No.
There's
No.
no way. And so, if the kid finds out when they're in their 20s, that's the betrayal I talked about earlier,
Hmm.
and it destroys the trust,
Yeah.
and it makes the kid or the person who finds out really, really angry because they
Hmm.
do feel betrayed.
Yeah. And so, and adoption is one of those things that you should be talking about early, and you just talk about it in terms that they understand. And so we
Yeah, age
discussed
appropriate term. Yeah.
age appropriate terms. And we discussed this a little bit before we began. And you said that Lindy's take on this is you make it all about we chose you,
Yeah,
correct?
because it's almost universal that at some point the child who's been adopted is going to think about, why did my birth parents reject me?
Yes.
Now, they aren't going to use those words. I mean, as they get older, they might use those words, but the child is. And so, where you want to really focus in an age appropriate way is through the parents who, we chose you, we want you in our family. So, you counter that this child is wanted, because at some point they are going to struggle with that idea that someone did not want them.
Right. And, that is just an inevitable part of adoption, but it
Hmm.
does not counter the wonderful, beautiful thing that adoption
Right,
is.
right,
Right. I mean, because, you did choose this child and you're giving
right.
this child a wonderful, beautiful life that they might not have had otherwise. And so, I think that, yes, that is something that a child is going to have to deal with, but you can counteract that by
Hmm.
just being transparent and saying, we chose you, we love you. And, just because you're not biologically ours doesn't mean you're not ours. We still
Right,
consider you
right,
our child.
right.
So some other areas where this could fall into is, the death of a family member, right? And maybe the death was as the result of suicide or a drug overdose. And so, that can be tricky with a young kid. So maybe this happens when a child is like, 2 or 3. And again, it's one of those things everybody in the family is going to know about it except for this child. So eventually this child is going to grow up and say, well, what happened to my daddy?
Yeah,
And if you are dishonest or if you lie or if you make it this big secret, that's going to create problems because eventually the truth is going to come out. So, you kind of approach it from the same angle of you just talk about it in age appropriate ways the child can understand, but you don't just avoid it forever. You don't lie about it.
Right. You don't lie about it. And yeah, age appropriate. But when you think about suicide, for some reason, I should probably understand this better than I do. But I don't understand why people feel shame
Hmm.
around a family member who's chosen to end their life.
Yeah.
I Unless there's some sort of shame that the people feel like they should have been able to prevent this in some way. Like if I would have done something different, then my husband wouldn't have killed himself. Something like that. Maybe that's where the shame comes from. But I think
Hmm.
that's what causes them to then try and keep it a secret is shame.
And maybe it's not just shame. Maybe they're doing this just because they want to protect their child. Maybe they feel like this is going to be too hard for the child to hear, or I don't want to cause my child pain, by saying this family member killed themselves. So maybe they're just trying to avoid unnecessary distress for the child, but eventually it's going to come out and it's going to cause even more distress because there's going to be the added distress of betrayal. So it's better to just address it in those age appropriate terms as it starts to crop up.
No, I think you're right. And you really reminded me that I think parents, a large number of parents do keep secrets thinking this is
Yeah.
really in the best interest of the child.
Yeah.
And so I don't think they go about it, thinking, well, I want to keep the secret because, well, they think about it because it's going to be best for the child, is what they think. But it's not. In the
Hmm.
end, it will not be. And I try and help parents understand that it eventually the child will find out whatever it is you're keeping a secret, and they will be angry with you.
Yeah. And it can be hard to have that conversation or hard to know how to broach it, but just come at it from that angle of, you're trying to protect him now, but you're not doing, are you really protecting them? Because eventually it's going to come out. I mean, sure, maybe there is that chance that they can go their whole lives and never find out, but do you really want to run that risk?
Well, it is a risk, and I don't think it'll happen. I think nowadays,
Yeah.
you'll find out. But if you are in this situation and your parents and the child, and you're struggling to figure out how do you talk to a child, I think seeking the help of someone like Lindy,
Hmm.
someone who works with kids, because she often does one or two time consultations with just
Mm.
this type of issue, where
Hmm.
they'll talk about, okay, how do you do this? What's the age? What words to use? Things like
Mm.
that.
Hmm.
And so I think if you are seeking guidance from someone who has a lot of experience working with kids, that can be helpful. Because it kind
Yeah.
of makes sense to me that a lot of parents aren't going to know where to start.
Yeah.
And if I
Hmm.
were a parent and didn't know where to start, I wouldn't feel bad about that. I'd say,
No.
I've never encountered this. This is something that no one I know has encountered. So I really need to seek the help of someone who has more experience.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, we're only human.
Yeah. But there
And
are people out there who can help you. So listeners who might be in this position, where
hmm.
they're trying to figure out, I have something hard. We have something hard that we need to talk to our child about.
Hmm.
Think about, seeking just a consultation. So
Yeah.
going to therapy does not mean you're going to get stuck in for the rest of your
Yeah.
life in therapeutic process. It can be a one or two time process.
Yeah. And that's a good point. And I really like that, this idea that you can just seek the help of a
Hmm.
professional to just deal with, you know, something big like this, and maybe it's something that cropped up all of a sudden, right? Or maybe it's
Yeah.
something that happens, maybe you have a 1 or 2 year old whose parent dies by suicide, and
Hmm.
hopefully you're seeking some counseling anyways for that because that's pretty traumatic. It's
Right.
not a bad idea to bring that up of how do I eventually talk to my kid about this. So I mean,
Yeah.
resources are out there, and there
But
are.
let me emphasize again: seek someone who actually works with children or has a lot
Yeah.
of experience with children. But,
Yeah. Yeah. And they can point you in that direction. And so, as we've been talking about this, one of the things that we've said over and over is the truth is going to come out anyways. So you might as well do it in the way that you control. And so that's another way to think of this, of why
yeah,
it's
yeah,
important not to keep the secret, because if you are the one to tell them, and if you are the one to kind of let this out and let this be okay and let this be open, you get to control it. You get to control the timing. You get to control the information of the way this person first hears it. And, so think about that too, is maybe you're trying to protect your child from, the idea that their parent killed themselves when they were young. Well, who knows what they're going to hear when that secret finally comes out?
Right.
Do you want
So,
them hearing your version or do you want them hearing somebody else's version?
yeah, and this falls into that situation that I've talked about before. We all create narratives of our lives.
Hmm.
And so I think as parents, it's really our responsibility to be the ones to create the narratives that our children hear, because
Yeah.
that's how we transfer values. And that's our job as parents,
Hmm.
to teach them. So I agree with you. It's about controlling the narrative. That's our job as
Yeah.
parents.
And then you can also prepare them for the unpleasant things that are maybe going to
That
say
might
about this.
Yeah, they might say, yeah, you're right. If other kids know, they might get
Hmm.
comments from kids, and I think it's really good to prepare them to say
Yeah.
this might happen,
Yep.
and here's what you could do if it does happen. Because otherwise, yeah, our kids get caught off guard all the time, and they don't know what to do.
Yeah.
And so again, that's our job, I think, as parents, is to help prepare them.
And another thing that we haven't talked about that we should probably bring up, kids are terrible at keeping secrets anyways.
Oh
They're not
yeah,
going to do
that's
it.
right.
I have kind of, yeah, I have kind of a funny story about this. And it was a surprise, not a secret, but we bought a birthday gift for a friend and our oldest daughter, she was 3 at the time. She was there when he opened it. And so we give it to him and she blurts it out right there in front of him what it is.
Yeah, yeah,
I mean,
kids don't do that very well.
no, kids are terrible at surprises and they're going to be even worse at secrets. And so, again, if you come at this from the idea of this is private, then, it makes it okay for the child to talk about it at home. And then they're not going to feel as obliged to talk about it outside of the home.
Right.
So, if you're giving them an outlet, then they're not going to want to go spill their secrets. This actually just came up in church on Sunday. Like our primary teachers. So primary is the organization of all of the kids 18 months to 11 years old, and they have teachers that teach them based on age group. And somebody said, "Yeah, primary teachers know all your family secrets. They know
Oh
more than you
no,
think."
no.
So, but think about it. Kids are terrible at, they are really bad
That's
about
true.
yeah, they're really bad
Oh,
about keeping secrets. They
yeah,
will tell somebody. And especially if there's this element of shame or of, this element of anything that makes them uncomfortable, eventually they're going to find a way to get it out.
right.
So we've talked about this idea of privacy versus secrecy in terms of children with their bodies and sexuality. And so,
Hmm. Hmm.
it's the same thing applies, right? I mean, we've talked to our kids about sex before, and we've explained to them this is a private matter that we talk about within our home. We don't go sharing this with our friends because it's a private family matter. And so it's the exact same thing in terms of, it could be anything, an illness, maybe somebody in the family is in trouble with the law, right? I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah.
uh,
Well, we had to mention the other one you have under this on our outline, addiction.
mhm.
I
Yeah.
think nowadays in families, addiction sadly is common, and
Hmm.
so how do you talk to children about addiction? How do you talk about addiction in the home? And again, if you're a parent and you're struggling, trying to figure out how to do that, I think, seeking the help of someone who works with children is important. But also, the reason to address it directly and not keep it a secret is because kids always can pick up the behaviors. There are
Yeah.
certain behaviors that are going to occur with any addiction. Kids are going to pick it up and they're going to understand that there's something different or there's something wrong
Hmm.
going on here. And in the absence of information, kids often tend to internalize it in whatever it is. And
Hmm.
so the risk is the kid thinks, oh, my dad's acting weird because of me. And so you really do need to address it so the kid doesn't internalize what's going on. Or sometimes my dad checks out because, any addiction causes certainly a change in all the relationships, right?
Right.
It puts a wall up in between the relationships. And so the child's going to feel that. And, if a parent thinks that a child doesn't know that they've got an addiction, that is just being naive.
Yeah.
These kids, they may not know the word to call it,
Hmm.
and they may not know exactly what's going on, but they're going to know something's different, and they're going to know that at times you treat them differently. And
Yeah.
so you have to be able to address it and not keep it a secret. You can keep it private,
Hmm.
but you don't want to keep it a secret.
Yeah, and that's a good point. And the same thing goes with any sort of mental health disorder. If you don't talk about it, that kid is going to internalize it. So maybe you have a parent who is really struggling with depression. They're
Mhm.
going to think daddy is sad because I'm bad.
Yeah, yeah,
Kids just internalize everything, and there's
yeah.
nothing you can do to prevent that or change it because it's just the nature of kids.
Well,
But
or to give them information, I think you can, to help them
exactly.
understand.
Yeah, you can help them understand it and you can again help change that narrative.
Yeah.
Okay, so before we wrap up, I want to get into the idea of teens and
Ah,
secrecy
good.
versus
It's good.
privacy.
It's a good topic.
Yes, because it can be really hard because teenagers, man, it's that rough age where it's like they're starting to gain some autonomy, but you're still really responsible for their well-being. And so, where is that line between with teens between secrecy and privacy, right? That's so hard.
Well, okay. This is a really good subject. We probably do a whole episode on this. I don't know that there should be secrets. Again, because that involves the shame or the fear.
Hmm.
I think the real question is, what should teens be allowed to keep private?
Mm.
And so the problem, and I don't know that we're going to come up with an answer, because I think it's very difficult. Because nowadays, with and our listeners probably know if they've heard me talk before, that I'm pretty anti social media. And actually, there's a lot of evidence coming out about the harm that social media can do to teens. And in fact,
Hmm.
I think I mentioned this maybe in our last episode, that the state of Utah and other states are suing somebody. I don't know if it's TikTok or
It's
whatever it is.
probably TikTok.
And I think some school districts are doing the same thing.
Mm.
So people are realizing that, unrestricted access, again, this is my opinion, unrestricted access to social media for teens is not a good idea. So
Yep.
I'm just going to put that out there.
Yeah.
So the question then becomes, what's private on the teen's phone? Now, a lot of teens are going to have phones. And here's what I tell the parents that I see, that I don't know of a teen who's able to afford or get their own phone.
Yep.
It's always, the parent gives them a phone, and, it's a great thing and puts them on their plan. I think a parent should always say, this is my phone. I am letting you use it
Yep.
from the start.
And
This is my
see,
phone. You get to use it, and I get to look at it whenever I want, and
and
I
if
get to
you
have full access
and if you set that boundary from the
at
get-go
the start.
at the start, then again, that's an expectation. And so the child, your teenager is going to understand the expectation and they're going to act in accordance to that expectation, right?
Well, maybe, maybe
Hopefully,
not,
right? But
because
at least
nowadays there's so many ways that people can get around it, and so
it's
their friends who are technologically savvy are going to know. But I don't think that should say to a parent, you shouldn't put the boundary up.
yeah,
And I am also realized that teens can get around it. Anyone can get around
sure. But at least there's that
it. But set the
expectation.
expectation. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I
I
and
agree.
and that expectation, it really clears up any ambiguity between what's secret versus what is private. So they understand this cell phone is not private. This
Yeah.
is not my
Yeah.
private cell phone. So I'm not entitled to hide anything or to keep anything on it because mom and dad could potentially find out.
That
So,
computer you're using is not yours. It is
yes,
mine. I'm letting you use it.
yes.
And so again,
Or
you don't
that,
have privacy there.
and that iPad where you came home from school with
Yeah.
does not belong to you. It
To
actually
you.
belongs to the school, and nothing
Right.
on that is private. And, that leads into a really good conversation of helping kids understand that nothing is private, that electronics and
Right.
technology is not private.
Right.
And so no matter how private you think you can make it, Curtis, for his degree, he got into cybersecurity, and there is no such thing as privacy on the
No.
internet.
No.
And so, kids need to understand that, because they think that there is. They think that they can just do these things, like they can do things like send a nude picture of
Right.
themselves or of somebody else, and it's private. It is not private.
And once it's out there, it's always out there.
It's always out there, and you cannot undo it. So, takeaway, secrets are bad.
Yeah. Secrets don't work. Privacy is important.
Yes.
I really believe that. I hope that's come across to our listeners, that I believe boundaries are important, and
Yes.
privacy is all about boundaries, but secrecy is about shame and fear and the loss of trust and building of walls. So secrets are bad.
Yeah, secrets are bad.
Within a family.
Takeaway. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, within a family. Yeah. All right. So next week we are going to get into triangles, which is not
a math episode. That's great.
No, it's not great, Mark. I don't like math.
Okay. What kind of triangles are you talking about?
Being caught in the middle.
Okay.
No, they're called, in the world of psychology, they're called coalition triangles.
Yeah.
So when you are caught in the middle, and we're going to talk about getting
what to do, how not to be pulled into one.
Yes,
people are pulled into them. Yeah.
Yes, how to avoid it in the first place, and what to do if you are caught in the middle, because I think sometimes you can't avoid it. Bless Curtis and his wonderful patience when he got caught in between me and his mother. That's a hard place to be.
That is.
But it just happens.
No,
it's sometimes
no
unavoidable.
husband ever wants to be caught between his wife and his mother. Ever.
But I'm sure it's happened. It probably happened to everybody.
Oh, probably.
All right. Yeah. So we're going to get into that next week. And in the meantime, we will see you all then.
Have a good week, everyone.
Have a question for Dr. Burton? How about a topic you'd like us to cover? Send us an email at mentalhealthpod21@gmail.com. This podcast was produced and edited by Liz Lang. Music is by Audio Lounge.